Inclusion Setting for Special Education Students and the Effect on Final Grades by Stacy Embody. The question for the research is attending classes in an inclusion setting rather than a resource room more beneficial to students receiving special education? Prior to 1975, 1 in 5 children with identified disabilities attended public school. These included children who were blind or deaf and children labeled as emotionally disturbed or mentally retarded. The disabled students that did attend school were segregated into self-contained classrooms. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and Section 504 was one of the first federal laws passed that specifically was for the rights of people with disabilities. And what it did is it prohibited any organization that received federal funding to discriminate against people because of their disabilities. The Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, was originally passed in 1975 and had amendments and reauthorization in 1997 and 2004. What IDEA gives the children with disabilities the right to obtain free public school education and receive any necessary services to attend public school without any additional cost to the family. Students with disabilities were to receive an education in general education setting to the greatest extent possible. And then with the 1997 amendment, the focus was on giving students with disabilities greater access to general education curriculum and to the general education classrooms. There are some court cases that were important to improving the rights of children with disabilities in regards to their education. In 1989, Daniel R.R. versus the State Board of Education, the result of that court case stated that students with disabilities should be educated in the least restrictive environment, or LRE, that the student would be able to use accommodations and modifications to be taught in the general education classroom, and if that was not successful, then there needed to be some way to mainstream students with disabilities in other areas. In 1992, there was Greer versus Rome City School District that stated students should not be denied the right of an inclusion educational setting because of an added cost that's needed to provide the necessary accommodations, and the school district was responsible for those costs. Oberti versus the Board of Education of the Borough of Clementon School District in 1993 stated that students with disabilities have the right to attend school in their home district and that the home district was responsible for any additional costs. In 1998, there was Hartman versus Loudoun County, and this stated that school districts have the right to implement the degree of inclusion on an individual basis, especially if the student's disability caused disruptions in an inclusion setting. In 2001, renewal of the No Child Left Behind Act, which is a part of IDEA, the No Child Left Behind Act holds the school districts responsible for showing adequate yearly progress, or AYP. And what the AYP is that it had to show that students with disabilities are learning and growing every year, even though they may not be reaching grade level benchmarks. Now, there has been additional research on inclusion versus the resource room. Costin and Thoreau et al. Stated that serving special education students in a resource room was beneficial because the special education students were taught different content with different skills to master at each grade level. Robinson and Babot in 2014 took it one step further by saying that there were 4 benefits for delivering instruction to special education students in a resource room. 1 stated that teachers' planning would be more efficient. Number 2, students with higher disabilities would gain more growth. Number 3, students with lower disabilities would not become as easily frustrated in class. and it would be easier to handle any discipline problems in the classroom in that small group resource room setting. Robinson and Babot also continued with some negative impacts of ability grouping. The lower ability students may have lower expectations without having the higher ability students in the classroom to push them further. Lower ability students could receive a lower quality education instruction because of the lack of the higher expectations. And also the number of delinquent students and students that dropped out may increase when special education students are taught in a resource room. So Robinson and Babot looked at both the positives and the negatives of the resource room. Nicholas and Sheffield in 2013 had research that showed about teachers' views on inclusion and whether they had positive or negative views of inclusion. Their research indicated that teachers generally opposed inclusion because it was a change to the way that they have been teaching. Inclusion typically has one special education teacher and one general education teacher. And the teachers polled in that research felt like the other teacher was always kind of watching and judging any failures during the lesson. And then there was the discussion of teachers having to share the authority in the classroom. There are some things needed to make co-teaching work. There needs to be a good professional relationship. The teachers need to be able to work together to establish goals and expectations in the classroom, as well as the roles that each teacher will take on in the classroom. They also have to be able to work together to establish the classroom structure and the student expectations before classes start. There are some challenges to co-teaching. One can be lack of communication between teachers. If the teachers are not compatible with each other, that can cause some difficulty. The teachers also need to have co-planning time to prep their lessons, discuss their roles, and also their general attitudes and beliefs towards inclusion. Now, what are some polls of students and their views on inclusion versus a resource room? The research found support for both settings. And when they polled special education students and general education students, the overall result was that the students liked inclusion because they had that additional support of 2 teachers in the classroom. When looking at the results of the special education students surveys only, those that liked the resource room better stated that they liked it better because they received additional help with assignments and the content. They felt like there were more fun activities that were done. They thought the work was easier, whether it really was or not. The smaller group helped them to be able to concentrate better. There were less distractions, and there was less embarrassment if students participating gave a wrong answer in class. So some benefits of inclusion: it can promote a sense of community in and out of the classroom. Research has shown improvement on state assessments, and there has been academic success and a success that's carried on into life after school. Vaughn and Klinger sum up the review of literature and the research the best by stating, "The important lesson is that no one educational model will meet the needs of all students with learning disabilities. Thus, there is an advantage to providing a range of educational models." So the specific methods used in the research design for this was a teacher questionnaire, a student learning style survey, and then the final grades in the math classes. A description of the sample is 7th and 8th grade students for the 2014-2015 school year. The criteria is that the students had to be on IEPs or individualized education plans. They had to be in that math inclusion setting for 2014-2015 school year, and then also in a different setting for the 15-16 school year, whether that was inclusion, general ed, or the resource room. The instruments that were used were a teacher survey to help gauge the feelings of inclusion with the teachers that were delivering the instruction, a student learning style survey to help the students see the best type or what type of learner they were, and then the final grades for their math classes for both years. The teacher surveys were given at the beginning of the school year. All students complete the learning style survey, and then the final grades were specifically in math class. Some validity issues include final grades, just looking at average grades throughout the year. Learning style surveys and the teacher surveys, there was a small sample size used, so generalizations could not be made on a larger scale. There's different grade levels in content when comparing the 2 years. Some of the students stayed in junior high, while those 8th graders moved up to their freshman year of high school. And there's different teaching styles between the 4 teachers that were used in this research. And to the results. Now, this first graph shows the results for students during the comparing the 2 years, their final math grades. 2 of the students experienced growth. 2 of the students experienced a decline in their academic final grade. And 1 student, his grade for the second school year was unavailable due to a different placement during the school year. These were students that were in the resource room for both years for their math instruction. This group of students were in the general education setting for both years. They all experienced a decline or stayed the same. Vanessa was able to stay the same, while Madison, Trevor, and Zeb declined in their academic growth. And then students that were in a different classroom setting, they were all in a general education inclusion setting for 14-15 school year, and then 15-16 were in a small group resource room. 6 of the 9 students were able to see a growth in their final grades for math, while 3 of the students saw a decline. These results were of the teacher survey on inclusion practices. The majority of the teachers were on the same page. Teacher 1, 2 were special ed teachers. Teacher 3 was a general ed math teacher. Teacher 4 was also a general ed math teacher. These were results of the student learning style survey. I had 5 students that were auditory, 7 that were kinesthetic learners, and 6 that are visual learners. So if you look at the students that were in the resource room for both years, the overall results are split, with half the students experiencing growth, the other half of the students experiencing a decline in their overall academic structure or overall final academic grade. The students in the general education setting, this was interesting because their 14-15 school year, they were in an inclusion setting in the general education classroom with a special education teacher present along with the general education teacher. And for the 15-16 year, they were in the general education setting on their own without a special education teacher in the room. The students in the different classroom settings, again with 6 of 9 of them showing growth, it showed that the resource room for those students in particular was more beneficial. The 3 students that experienced a decline, Chandler and John, both had significant absences in the 15-16 school year where they missed out on instruction, and this can play a part in why their final grades were so much lower. Again, the teacher survey, the teacher 4, not as apt to having inclusion when compared with the other teachers. In conclusion, there are other factors that need to be taken into consideration when looking at the placement. Based on the results of this study and the sample size, it's inconclusive to say inclusion is better or resource room is better. The individual students' needs to be considered when placing students for classes.